Welcome to Basics of Hunting, where we cut through the BS of modern, gimmicky hunting tactics and get back to the tried and true basics that help us be successful in the woods.
Miss the rut? This is your last chance for a giant buck. I'm Christian Babcock, host of the Hunter's Advantage podcast. I'm joined by Jake Gaylord on the show. Today we're going to be talking about the basics of post-rut hunting. We have many forms of the show. We do hunt talk episodes where we do kind of water cooler conversations, just kicking it back and forth, talking about a hunt that we did in maybe the past week or weekend. We bring in guests of the show. That can be hunters, biologists, whatever. We do live Q&A. We haven't done as many of those during the hunting season, but we try to do those more in the off season. And this version of the show, which is one of our personal favorites, the basics of hunting, where we kind of cut through the modern BS of overly complicated hunting tactics and techniques, and we get back to the tried and true basics that make us really good hunters. But with that, we're in the basics of hunting. We're doing the dang thing. Jake, what are you thinking now that we're kind of here in the post rut?
Well, if the question is, what is the post rut? That equals death, right? Like all your hopes and dreams. The best is not yet to come. The best has came and it went, and it's you're seeing the taillights. Yeah, it's sad. But that's what they want you to think. That's not what we're here to tell you. Now, is all the spontaneous hunts gone? Possibly, but maybe not quite. There's also a thing called the second rut, which we'll get into, right? But before that, Christian, why don't you, kind of just, for the people might be new to hunting, what is post-rut? Maybe they've heard it before. Maybe they've heard, I've heard all sorts of ruts. There's a pre-rut, there's a full rut, and then there's now this post-rut. What is it?
It's pretty simply. It's like a curve. You have all the, it's like a movie. You have the rising action, you have the falling action, you got the climax at the top. That early part of the year, you're obviously walking around through the
Christian, I see.
I took a film appreciation
class. You'll rest your seat, sir. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I did. So I know just slightly a little bit about film. But no, we got this pre-rut ramping up, obviously to the rut for the most of the people that are in the Midwest or the South. That's going to be in your early to mid part of November. And, everything that's good that comes up has to come back down. And that's what the post-rut is. Well, all that spontaneous good breeding behavior where you're seeing the shooter bucks that you haven't seen all year, the bucks you didn't even know existed in the rut, that kind of behavior is gone after the breeding activity. So we're here sitting on December 6th. In most of the country, the biggest part of that bell curve, the rut is over, and we're back to a bed to food pattern. We're back to food. We're back to replenishment. We're back to putting all that weight on that we lost going crazy chasing chicks for the last 3 or 4 weeks. That's what the post rut is to me.
So basically you're transitioning from hunting to rut, which you'd want, travel corridors, whatever that might look like to you in your part of the country. And then now you're in the post rut and you're focusing on the bed of food. So does that mean hunting over winter wheat, maybe some standing beans? You're heading to Kansas here in the next week. So what's your goal on hunting public in Kansas?
I'm thinking this is, the corn that was my arch nemesis in September is now going to be kind of my best friend now that it's cut. I'm going back to all the big major food sources. So we got standing beans, if there is any yet. Yeah, they're going to be yellow and bitter, but it's better than nothing. I'm going to cut corn. That's another big one in the Midwest. Winter wheat, maybe if you're in a place like Oklahoma. Kansas got a lot of winter wheat, especially in the southeast portion of the state, not as much as in the north. I know another thing that I wanted to mention on going back to food patterns is red oaks. You can, most of your white oaks are going to be rotten and gone. They're not as big. There's not as sustainable. But in that late part of the season, if you can find you some good red oaks, those big freaking 50-cent piece looking suckers, deer, especially in the mountain habitats or let's just call it non-ag areas, are going to be going back to those red oaks. So I'm looking for some sort of food. A lot of the bucks that you've been chasing for the last few weeks or this whole year are going to be double-digit percentages lower in body weight from chasing does around, and food is going to be, apart from bedding and staying alive, food is priority number one this time for a deer, which is really exciting because it's pretty patternable in some sense.
So that's the key word right there, patternable. So maybe you had a buck, all summer, maybe even in October, but during, when it was heating up in the rut, he just disappeared. Now, you could have went through a couple gun seasons. He might have got taken by the neighbors, but also if he somehow survived all that and he's done with all the does, you might be catching them back on your cameras, so they're kind of transitioning back to what you said, like the bed to food, but kind of to where they have felt most comfortable, like their main home range. They're done chasing tail for the most part, and you might start getting them back on the trail camera. So that's not like horrible if you're, got some really good private land to hunt, or but if you might be hunting public, then it's like, like that's kind of what I was banking on to, try to get it done right now, which sucks, but maybe not for some people.
If your target buck didn't take a tailgate ride on November 26th with somebody's family celebrating Thanksgiving, there's a good chance he's on his way back. So,
well, for example, I was hunting down in Southwest Oklahoma, and we had an 8-point and an 11-point that was on camera, like previous to the rut, and even some during the rut. But that 11-point was completely, he was busy. He wasn't worried about stepping in front of my camera where I think he should have been, but he was in the area, obviously. But now, since the rut's kind of on the tail end and it's dying down, they're getting more food minded, he's back up on it. So that's just,
it's one
good
example.
to know. Yeah, it's just one example, but
Yeah, so going into this time of the year, obviously, bucks are in big bucks what we're after. Some people are probably still after does, but how do you kind of think about bedding in this part of the year? Are you thinking about it in terms of like transitionary hunting, bed to food, getting in between bedding, or how do you think maybe it changes in the kind of the post rut?
I think they're going to try to fall back into that cover more heavily, because you got to think you think you've been put through the ringer just because you haven't shot a deer, or maybe you're trying to fill your second buck tag. Think about those deer. Every waking moment, they've been through bow season. They've been through maybe a muzzleloader season, a rifle season. They should have schizophrenia by now. So I would want to be back up in that bedding and not move. I would want to go to food, eat, and then go back to bedding. That's what I would want to do. Plus, you got to think they've been chasing tail. They're very probably malnourished, and like that's what they want to do, is their body's in recovery mode, right? And like a layman's way of putting it. And so that's kind of what I think you need to focus on. So me personally, I would be, yes, hunting food, but it ain't a bad idea to get into those, areas leading from bed to food instead of just hunting over a food source. And especially if you're hunting public, and for example, your instance in Kansas, since it is public and Kansas rifle season is, right now, that's probably what everybody else is thinking is, hey, I'm gonna go set over this, these standing beans or this cut corn or whatever the food source is. That's probably what people are wanting to do. I got something that can poke a deer far out there. I'm gonna go sit where I can see a great distance, right?
Mm-hmm. I would think so. Do you think that bucks are changing their bedding in priority with food? Like, do you think that bucks are now bedding like close to food, not bedding 600-800 yards back into the thickest cover that there is, and making the food the priority, in the idea of kind of conserving calories, bedding even closer to the food this time of the year? Is that something that you consider at all? Because I'm thinking about the situation in Kansas in 2022 when that one thick strip of timber that you hunted in the blind where your broadhead got caught up into the blind and you weren't able to shoot that buck. Those deer were bedding in that little bitty strip of timber for the convenience to go into those standing beans.
I definitely think that does play a part, because you got to think, in December, and maybe not in Oklahoma or Texas that much, but maybe in the more northern states, it's really, really cold. So when it's really, really cold like that, they have to eat, and they probably got to eat more than usual. So would you want to, if the only thing you could eat was Chick-fil-A 30 minutes away, would you want to drive 30 minutes each time, or would you want to just be like, I'm just going to park here because I'll be hungry later?
I'd be parking in that lot.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Hitting that number too. But I would
Spicy chicken sandwich. Me too. That's awesome. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's probably situation dependent. I'm just saying that's something to consider because I've seen it in other areas. Like I just think deer get lazy at this point. They've exerted so much effort into the rut, and it's like, why would you want to? If 200 yards back in the timber is good, why would you want to go 800 if your main priority is putting back and packing on the body weight? Not saying that's ever going to be every individual deer, but it's just kind of something to consider, something to think about. Bow hunting is a game of confidence. And the last thing that you want to be thinking about when you're at full draw on a giant buck this fall is, I hope this broadhead does its job. I prefer a reliable, fixed blade broadhead that's tough, flies great, and penetrates deeply no matter the arrow setup. And that's why us guys at the Hunter's Advantage shoot Vantage Point archery broadheads. And just a few weeks ago in September, I laid down my first bull elk with the VPA Omegas. In my mind, there's no reason to risk messing with a broadhead that can have a mechanical failure when you can get a super tough, reliable broadhead that's sharp and flies great, and you don't have to worry about the thing failing on you. And if you needed any other reason to choose VPA, they're 100% made in America. To check them out, go to vparchery.com and make sure to use code HA10 at checkout for 10% off your next pack of broadheads. Once again, that's vparchery.com and make sure you use code HA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
So with that, trying to put it like, just picture it. So you're hunting a bed of food. Would you be more willing to hunt closer to the bedding or closer to the food within that like transition zone?
I don't think in the bedding areas, I'd be hunting way back in them. I think I'd be hunting in a staging in between that bed and food. So that might be meaning hunting 100 yards off of the food, just more into the bedding, just somewhere where those bucks that have maybe been pressured quite a bit, especially in those rifle seasons around Thanksgiving and early December, the spots that they might stage in before they go up in those food at night. Because if you went with your thermal, or you could shine a magic wand and light up those fields, there's going to be mature bucks in those fields. It's just, are they going to get to them before dark? So with that being said, I'd be probably staging just a little bit closer to the bedding. Barely out of food, if that makes sense. You alluded to it a little bit in the beginning of the episode, but there is this kind of secondary rut thought. I don't know what the actual cycling is on the does of when that happens, but the idea is that those does that are bred initially or the does that weren't bred initially are going to be going back into another estrus cycle. So
don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's either that, where like if the does that maybe didn't take, or maybe they just didn't get bred, they will go back into heat, and also the possibility of late dropping fawns or early drop, whichever one it is, where those fawns are just becoming of breeding age right at that time. And so maybe they weren't a month ago during November, but now they're of that breeding age where they're now into heat when they couldn't possibly be last month. So I think it's like a combination of the two.
And what you mean by that, fawns coming to age, like typically a fawn maybe dropped in May, but that might be one that was bred super late, maybe into January or late December, and that fawn's now born in late June, early July, and they're freaking
right.
They're just now losing their spots. Everybody's seeing it in November. You see one with spots, you're like, ooh, what do you got on here? Your mom and dad were doing it late. Yeah, but yeah, that's a good point. So all hope's not lost from the rutting perspective. There could be. You could see some of it. I haven't seen none of it. It hasn't been your experience either, right?
I have some family land that I'm able to hunt, and if you're a longtime listener, you already know what I'm going to say. It is a transition zone between two pretty good pieces, right? So like there's bedding on the neighbors to the south and bedding to just security cover in general to the north, right? I have no cover whatsoever. It's just a travel route. So with that being said, is like usually during the rut is when I catch those floater bucks, and I can usually sometimes get it done. But during December, that it's almost like to the date, December 2nd, it shuts off. Cameras shut off. Every now and then you might get a floater buck that like either might stay for the food because it's like a pretty good pecan orchard. Like he might stick around for an extended time, but that's very unlikely. And you're kind of just like hoping for a unicorn in that case. But when I see like bucks chasing per se, it's usually just like the like smaller bucks that don't really know anything, and they're like, I'm just trying to do what I seen happen a couple weeks ago, right? And it's
Yeah.
almost like they're just mimicking or practicing. Nothing's really happening, but you still hear like rut type of stuff, but it's usually just like little spikes and little dinks that are like, it's almost like a little sparring session. They're not throwing down, but they're like practice fighting as an example, but they're like trying to chase.
Yeah. I haven't seen a bunch of mature buck rutting activity late in mid to late December.
Absolutely not.
I don't think so. Haven't seen a ton of it, but maybe it could happen in your neck of the woods. The last thing that we want to talk about on this version of the basics of hunting, talking about kind of the post rut. What do you think about kind of the benefit? What do you think the benefit of just like all that cold weather that comes with the post rut, like the increased movement? Is that something you kind of hang your hat on? Cause the deer are going to be moving at a minimum, right? They kind of have to keep going after a brutal rut.
Yeah. Well, and I think we kind of touched on this a second ago, but everybody's heard that saying. I mean, if you're cold, so are they. And I think that's true. And with that, I just think that the more they move, the more it's just science at that point. They need calories to survive. So the colder it is, they need to move probably to stay warm. Thus, they burn calories. So they need to replenish that. Plus, it doesn't help that they're probably already malnourished from the rut. So with that, yeah, I think colder weather does equal more food consumption. So I think that's going to, in turn, make them move even more. So I think it's like a weird way to think about it, but yeah, I think that alone will help. What do you think?
Well, when you're thinking about like kind of food in the Midwestern stuff, like in the beginning part of the season, they're going to consume the food, but it's not out of necessity. Like it's not because they have to. In post rut, they absolutely have to just to survive. But that cold weather to me is like, it's almost more of a battle with yourself than it is with a deer. If you can like nut it out, that you can probably see a lot of deer, because just naturally with the root movement of the rut and the cold weather moving in, they're going to be moving a lot more and eating a lot more. So I think there is going to be they're more susceptible to daylight movement, especially I think in the evenings, where it's not nearly as warm as it is when the warm sun's coming up in the mornings, and hitting the ground. So I think the cold weather plays a really big factor in it, especially if you got the right gear and stuff and the attitude to kind of nut it out. I know a couple of the times we were hunting in Kansas, it's that wind chill and stuff, it gets brutal. At that point, it's a battle between you, not the battle between you and the deer.
Right. Yeah. Just bring some chapstick. You'll be all right. But our fifth and final point that we have here for you, about patterning the post-rut bucks that you have. What are some ways, Christian, that, either maybe it's a new spot and you're trying to find them, or maybe it's a private spot and you're kind of, hoping to bring it back around? Like maybe you need to tweak your stand a little bit. So like, what are you looking for when you're trying to, find and locate these postseason bucks?
The first thing that I'm thinking about, especially on private, is like still maintaining a low period of pressure while watching my trail cameras, because obviously that's the best way to continue to pattern a buck. I think what you're able to see if you're diligent and like watching your trail cam data is he coming back and hitting this in the morning? Is he coming back and hitting this in the evening? That getting off of that rut and being that unpredictability. This is kind of a season where they're coming back into that predictableness. Am I able to pattern one going out on public land? Maybe not in the sense of day after day after day, but if you see him do it once at this time of the year, the likelihood of him doing it again, if he got away with it, is pretty high. I'll use the Kansas example one more time, one fifth and final time. When we were hunting a piece of stripping, that strip of standing beans in Kansas, and we watched 3 or 4 good bucks over there kind of walk out of that single strip of timber and feed on the only strip of standing beans, You went in, adjusted, set up a ground blind where they were coming out of the tree line. And what did they do by that giant big landmark tree? They all floated out of the exact same thing again. That's a perfect example of that predictability working against.
Also, yeah, just because you said that example, that like just because the rut's over doesn't mean you're not going to see multiple bucks. Because originally the day before when we set up across on the other side of that field, we seen a huge wide 8-point. Like at the time, probably the widest 8 I've ever seen in my life. And then the next day, I went over there to try to shoot that 8 and set up closer to him. And I didn't see the 8, but I seen a brand new buck, and he was probably mid to high 120s, definitely a shooter. And obviously, just things happened, and I couldn't get a shot off. But there was 2 bucks in 2 days, 2 shooter bucks in 2 days, and it was December. And it's like, okay, so there are multiple bucks. It isn't just a lone scarcity, like barren desert now. It's it's still there's still deer out there,
and there's a chance if you're sitting in the right spot, you'll see every buck that you have on camera. You could see every deer you have on camera if you're on an isolated food source.
Yeah, that's true. But just to bring it back to the public thing, Cooper Hill, right? So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, he hunts kind of where we do in the mountains down on public, and he got it done. You want to talk about a late season buck and a post-rut buck? He got it done on so Oklahoma season closes January 15th. It was either the 13th or 14th of January, and he got it done on probably 130-inch 8, you would say, on public land,
or a 9. But yeah, it was a really nice buck.
Yeah, it was a great buck. And I asked him, I was like, dude, how did you do that? Because we went once in January, and it was a barren desert. Like there was nothing, not even squirrels, not even birds. I don't think we seen. And he said, what you got to do is you got to try to find. And he said it takes a lot of walking, but you got to find that hot dropping oak. And which
it was a red oak too.
Kind of sounds familiar with early season, right? Like with that, he was like, yeah, I checked out probably 7 or 8 spots that had decent dropping oaks, but he said then I found one that had just crazy good sign. Like they were dropping hard. There's tracks, there's poop, and he said he's seen more bucks on that trip than he's seen probably all year combined, just from finding that really good dropping oak. So with that being said, and especially down there, like most of the time, even during the rut, you could set in a really good spot and maybe hopefully see one good buck. And he said he's seen a lot of good bucks, and he said he's seen even bigger bucks that day, but the one he shot was just the one, like it was one of the smaller ones. And he said that that's just the one that actually gave him a shot.
That's awesome.
So yeah, with that being, so it ain't over. It ain't over until the fat lady sings, let me tell you.
Yeah. So just to recap, late season food, obviously bedding areas. There's the possibility of the second rut. Cold weather is going to increase movement, and then obviously bucks are back on a more predictable, patternable routine this time of the year. Just like Jake said, it's not over. So if you can brave the cold, even in the South, it's cold here, even in Texas now. I know we got a lot of Texas listeners, and it's cold, and you're not used to this. But if you can brave it, there's still a lot of bucks to be killed, and I guarantee there's going to be some big ones killed in this time period. Hopefully 2 more in the Midwest from me and Carol here in the next week.
I hope so. That would be awesome.
Well, I think that wraps the basics of hunting. That's the basics of post-rut hunting. If you guys like these episodes, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, and like the video. Make sure to leave us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple as well.
Also, let us know what you guys think. If you have anything to add about the basics of hunting post-rut, any need-to-know information that's helped you tremendously, be sure to drop them down in the comments, and let's all try to help each other. So with that, Jesus loves you.
Bye.